Alright, it's time to invade London more properly. This is basically our final stretch of the game. This part and the next two after this will be centered around London, as Nathan Howe, proudly and very complex character, Nathan Hale, arrives to destroy the tower.
Yeah, I can't wait to see the memorable actions our main character will do, like grunt, look really sad, and say like one sentence per level.
Hey,
Again,
to his credit, he has been, I guess, making good progress against the aliens.
Yeah, not just that. Again, Doom 2016 showcases that without saying a single line and what just a few actions, you know, of their hand, you can have a lot actually of characterizations. You know,
this game doesn't.
Yeah, well, again, the idea supposedly being that Hale is the tipping thing that actually helps humanity save the day, you know, against the Chimera. The idea that this one-man army is managing to trans over the Locust and foil their plans, you know.
Okay,
like, if I recall, hold on. Now, like, if I recall correctly, it was always planned from the get-go that there were going to be sequels, correct?
That was the idea of Ted Price. Like I said, in the same interview that I did mention, you guys will be able to see by No Resistance 3, he did mention that with this first game, they were kind of like essentially not winging it, but saying that, well, let's finish it in time and see, you know, where it sticks. But as he himself says immediately after, the mentality at Insomniac is always to create, you know, always franchises, not just one-off titles.
Okay, then that does really make me wonder why they didn't build off the characterization of Hale for this. My best guess would be they thought, hey, let's just keep things simple to let people immerse themselves into the world, and then
like
we'll drop more in the sequels.
Potentially, but give me just a second, Waves. That's the thing, Jova. Again, they probably really just wanted to capture the old FPS type of mentality of walk softly and carry a big gun. It's just a matter that, you know, if you normally are the kind of person that wants to have, you know, that wants to have more into a game story, especially for setting this, you probably are not gonna, you know, enjoy that.
I think the problem is
hold on. Go on, Waves. First.
Okay, Akira Hino, take notes. This is closer to what London actually looks like. A complete mess with shit being thrown around everywhere. and okay. Aside from the scorpions and the lack of people, this is closer to what
Professor, how many chimeras are on the screen right now?
Let's be careful. If Hino hears you, he'll make Professor Layton Act 0. Where it's a dark and gritty Layton game where Layton trades his sword for a machine gun.
Not just that, the top hat is not anymore made of, you know, cloth, but it's actually a complex helmet that is fused to his head.
There's a realistic portrayal of.
No, it's not realistic. You're turning Layton into Inspector Gadget.
Okay, not gonna lie.
You wanted a dark and gritty London, didn't you? Well,
okay.
There you go.
That's not dark and gritty. If it were dark and gritty, Layton's top hat would be torn into pieces. He'd be swearing everywhere he goes, and he would be accompanied by a young boy called. He'd call Luke his. That's the name he'd give his Tommy gun or something.
No, Dribs. You're thinking still too soft. If it were realistic, Layton wouldn't even bother with that top hat. He'd spend most of the game without it on. Then maybe during an action scene, from some destruction, it would fly onto his head. He'd look in a mirror and say,
I got it,
and toss it away.
I got it. Actually, that top hat, you pissed in it because where else is he gonna go?
Yeah, that would be perfect symbolism of how it would be such a giant dump on the franchise if they did that. But the thing, here's another one. Let's have Layton say that puzzles are garbage.
I never liked puzzles.
Yeah, I hate puzzles. And by the end of the game, there's a slight hint that he might actually like them.
That would be literally his Hail Hydra moment.
Yeah.
Jesus.
But yeah,
Everything. Yeah, he hates puzzles. He betrays his friends. He kills his adopted mom and dad because they mocked his hat or something. I don't know.
And the London in that game would be portrayed just like in here. So they completely destroyed everything you liked about Leighton, but at least London looks appropriate now.
Exactly.
going back to what we were talking about earlier, Tio, your comparison to the Doom Marine in Doom 2016 does get me to, I think, notice part of the reason why Hale is not as memorable even with that. It's that, okay, Doom 2016 goes over the top with its stuff.
Yes.
And it's not just that, but, like, even the lore, like, if for as little as Doom Marine speaks, the demons make it clear they fear you probably more than you fear them in story. So, you know, at least there, the whole world tells a story in that regard around Doom Marine because of how over the top it is. This, I mean, again, okay. In this kind of narrative, because the enemies really ain't gonna be talking about you as much, Hale needs to be a larger-than-life personality. Look at something like the Gears franchise. That is widely successful because Marcus Phoenix and his band of rogues are, well, pretty much a great unit, with amazing characters to bounce off of each other, at the very least to help with the solo campaigns and narrative.
I can tell you that the sequel will try to do something similar to that, because not only Hale will actually speak a lot more and have more of a clear personality, but he will also be part of a team.
Oh god, do they pull a Jack and Dexter 2 and it turns out Hale can only speak because he was tormented by horrendous experiments?
No, I'm gonna kill the Chimera.
It also shows the fact that despite there is the occasional bigger set piece, most of the game, at least so far, has been, again, typical FPS gameplay, which you've seen this shtick done a million times, even by the time this game came out.
Okay,
I guess I would probably take this over. Well, there is a component of FPS that we haven't mentioned. Like great texture.
Wow.
There is a component of FPS that we haven't mentioned during the history of FPS that I mentioned in previous part, as in the one that is colloquially referred to as either Eurojank or more appropriately Slavjank, as in a set of FPSs, a lot of FPSs actually, done between the end of the 90s and the early 2010s roughly, you know, with all the characteristics of them being, you know, on a gameplay standard, relatively by the number, always done in a state that is either Russia or one of the former Soviet states, like Ukraine, Hungary, you know, Poland, and so on. With the characteristic, instead of being way over ambitious with their kind of story.
Oh, so like Big Rigs?
Well, Big Rigs has a story.
Well, it was supposed to have a story. It was supposed to have a lot of things.
The games that get into this category, they do have a story. Over-ambition in a sense that they try to have a story of grand scale, of epic proportion, like say a time war that ranges from the dawn of time till the far future, or you know, the significance of life in a dilapidated ship in the middle of an iceberg, for example, stuff like that. But the gameplay in itself maybe is not the most, you know, refreshing thing ever as a result, mostly because of budget and, you know, the time constraints that a team from those kind of, you know, places would have. And of course the term jank mostly because for these very same reasons they might actually be a bit buggy, but generally they are a good time, you know. If I manage to make them work, I'll plan on showcasing one or two in the future of them. So
also,
I get what Pedro means also, because, you know, technically this is relative by the numbers. The next couple of games will actually have a few set pieces, but the quality of which you'll be up to you to judge.
I think
also, to throw in some more 2 cents here, I do get the feeling that this game was cribbing off the fact that, okay, let's be fair, at the time of this game's release, people probably would have eaten it up more because FPS was really just vatted and the multiplayer would have carried it. People probably would have played the solo campaign and went, oh, well, you know, that's fine, got me a good feel of the game. The problem is how it's aged in that regard, since, again, okay, a lot of games can age better because they had to rely on the single-player content. I do feel that one of the detriments of the multiplayer genre, and you know what? Not all multiplayer genres, but like particularly FPS multiplayers, was that they tended to live or die based on the multiplayer. Which means that, in hindsight, what you would have to fall back on when, you know, the servers go down is the single-player content. And when the single-player content was kind of exposed to not be that great, well, I get the feeling that's partly why Resistance is not exactly remembered high and mighty. Oh, I'm sure that there's a fan base, but, like, you know, let me put it like this. Despite Halo and Gears' own missteps, which have been severe and fatal, they still, I assure you, have a bigger fan base that are still sticking around because of the legacy that their solo content, in addition to their multiplayer content, left.
Sure. No, it's because, like, again, like, Gears aged well because even when the servers do go down, you still have really strong first-player campaigns to play. Whereas this game, when I'm guessing the servers by this game are down
for all of them, yes.
Yeah. So at this point, all you have is a single-player campaign, which means about 70% of the game's value is lost.
Funnily enough,
it really is. These games desperately need. I don't think we probably will get the re-release of these games because at this point there's not. I don't think there's enough demand.
Like, well, okay, a couple, while not very vocal, you know, a couple of I've seen around a couple of people who will be okay actually seeing at least the single player being re-released. But like I mentioned in one of the earlier parts, there's also the component of the gameplay being substantially different from one game to the others. You will be able to see when we actually, you know, transition to them. But let me put it this way. Like I said, probably the best way this will be released is to do what the Crash Insane trilogy did, as in have essentially a set of 3 remakes that uses a more uniform art style and the same more type of gameplay with type of controls. Because otherwise, you get again. Playing these back to back, you do feel the difference between each game. I mean, keep in mind, it also makes a bit of sense because there's a thing that we haven't considered yet, the fact that these games were released through the course of several years. This one came out in 2006. Resistance 2 came out, I think, either 2008, and Resistance 3 is in 2011. Meaning over the course of 5 years. And keep in mind, this was the time where Insomniac was super busy with a fuck ton of other projects. Remember, they were having at least a Ratchet & Clank game per year at that point. And also, they were working with EA on a project that was really supposed to be called Overclocked. No, well, first of all, again, there's a story behind that, but to oversimplify, it was supposed to be called like Overclock and be a team shooter, single player focused with banter between them, classic humor. And then Electronic Arts happened again.
Oh no.
Basically telling them to scrap the most of the story that they had and make it more serious. And the game was called Fuse, and nobody gave a shit.
Fuse. Yeah, I don't think.
Let me put it this way, Jova. When it comes to Sunset Overdrive, might have not sold that much, and now, to the point of Microsoft not giving a shit, and now Insomniac now retaining the IP. But at the very least, you can tell that with that, they did manage to finish the product and made something that was fun and more up to, their standards. Fuse. If this series in Resistance already feels a bit distant from what Insomniac tends to do, Fuse is even more of a departure. Like, I don't even know why they wanted to work with EA games.
Okay,
honestly,
like, does Fuse even go darker and more gory?
Not that I know, because I actually need to play. I only know about basically this development. But essentially, it turned out to be another generic, military co-op shooter, despite the fact that EA had a bunch of them lying around with like Medal of Honor, Battlefield, and Army of Two at the time.
I will say this. Is it sad that the thing I remember most about Fuse was just its absolute lack of coverage from even reviewers.
I'll need to find a copy because unfortunately it was not released on PC, only on PS3 and Xbox 360. So I'll need to see if it's something floats around.
I do recall it was a critical and commercial failure, which was kind of a rarity for EA, who had a knack for turning even the biggest of crap into gold.
More in a second. Go on, Pedro.
Back during the PS3 era, I kind of had a problem that I thought that Insomniac at the time was spreading themselves way too thin. They were making way too much shit at the same time.
Where have I heard that before?
And I think that eventually started to show a bit in their output here and there. Like for example, remember there was actually a Ratchet & Clank game on the PS3 that was called. The one that came out before Crack in Time.
Quest for Booty.
That game is like 2 hours long.
Well, the idea is that it was supposed to be... Actually, hold on. First the cutscene. Oh, because I think there's this section after.
I'm outside. Where are you?
Right. We see you now. Be advised, Sergeant.
Hale's talking again.
Yes, because he's reaching the position in order to help... there you go, the character arrived, but
bloody hell!
There's a stalker nearby, which means we have technically a quote-unquote boss fight. Problem. See, here's the big problem with this particular section. You don't have rockets yet for your rocket launcher, and the level doesn't give you ammo for that. You have to defeat this thing with everything aside the rocket launcher.
Surely.
Because I guess they wanted to have the boss fight being a bit more prolonged and not ending in 5 seconds. But still, this is kind of bullshit. I guess an effective strategy would be try to conserve your rockets until this point, but I can tell you that it's nearly impossible. So you need to exploit these minor trenches in order to, circumvent the stalker. The idea behind it is that you're supposed to wait until it loses interest in you, turns around, and then shoot the weak point behind the back for massive damage. The problem is that either the AI is a bit wonky on its own, or it doesn't work as intended regardless, because you just need to pick your head up, minimum between the cracks, and the stalker will immediately notice you and start hitting you. So you need to be very careful. But that's what you're basically seeing. Again, cutting away a factor of that. To answer to what Taylor was saying, the thing about Quest for Booty is that it's pretty clear that it probably was supposed to be DLC for Tools of Destruction. But they probably just retooled it as a separate game, but I think it only got released digitally. And first of all, it was released also for a cheaper price. And eventually, when Nexus was released into the Nexus, usually it came bundled with a copy of that.
Quest for Booty did get a physical release about a few weeks after it came out on PlayStation Network.
Oh, okay.
Keep in mind, here, I have right here the list actually, just to give you a basic idea of how many games Insomniac released on the PS3 alone. Resistance Fall of Man, Ratchet & Clank Tools of Destruction, Ratchet & Clank Quest for Booty, Resistance 2, Ratchet & Clank Future Crack in Time, Resistance 3, Ratchet & Clank All for One, because even though it was a spin-off, it was developed by Insomniac themselves, Ratchet & Clank From Frontal Assault, Fuse, which was a PS3 version, Ratchet & Clank Into the Nexus. So yeah, they released a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 games. 10 games on the PS3 generation alone. That is overkill for one studio.
But I can tell that, okay, maybe I guess these ones, if I have to be honest, but I can tell you for the Ratchet & Clank games that I played, I didn't find anyone that got released around the time that was something that I could consider bad, unplayable, or not fun to play.
Let me put it like this: it was either that
the games were bad necessarily.
The problem was that they were lacking in content at times due to the fact that they were stretched in.
Like Into the Nexus was not as short as Quest for Booty, but it was definitely more on the shorter side compared to
True, but it wasn't also released at full price, if I remember correctly.
Also, if I recall correctly, Deadlocked is kind of ass.
Well, it's still fun enough to play at the very least.
Yeah.
I can tell you that. For
That
when it comes
a PS2 game, though. It's important
when
to
it comes
remember.
to Ratchet and Clank games, Jovan, even in the worst case scenario, as arcade experiences, they're still very fun to play. Which I guess it's more than I can ask.
Oh
That's
yeah, they're
fair.
my
Oh,
only
and
issue...
of course, after defeating the Stalker, they dropped a Titan on you. Fuck me. Bullshit. Gone.
My only issue with the okay, it's not just the strain that's also fan. Starts, ends in a cliffhanger. Let's put it that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean we're going to? Okay, so the next mainline game will go into this, right? No, we get a remake of the first game that
It was supposed to be a tie. Again, it was supposed to be a tie into the movie. Also, here's our introduction officially to the Widowmaker. This bastard is basically the equivalent of a Chimera proper tank. Loves to release those goopy mines that you also have for one of your weapons. On a tank, it's fine to handle, but you later will be able to. You have to, handle it on your foot. The appearance of a Widowmaker on the battlefield requires immediate engagement by all soldiers. Widowmakers attack with their barbed foretalons or by spewing explosive globules. In addition to causing tremendous casualties, Widowmakers have a rallying effect on other Chimera strains. They have been known to irreversibly turn the tide of battles. Attacks with high explosives or vehicle-mounted weapons should focus on the creature's face or body. Again, shoot it until it dies.
The spider inspiration is obvious with this one.
Yes, Pedro.
Although when it comes to going back to the whole, stretching themselves too thin argument, like, let me put it this way: I'm sure these three games have their fans and they're overall still perfectly serviceable FPSs for what they are. I still feel like most people, obviously not everybody, but most people will probably have preferred if instead of making this trilogy, they instead spent the people and resources on trying to improve upon their Ratchet content.
Well, yeah,
make it even better.
Like I said at the very beginning, the very first part, if this trilogy was the only thing that Insomniac did for the PS3 era, my tone would be completely different in describing these, because just on their own, they're not really something that I would consider, and even for me, whole classic horror titles. Sure, not to the point, it's not the worst Sony IP that I've ever seen, but they've seen better. But I can tell you this, without spoiling too much, because it's something that I've briefly seen, and once again, you guys will be the full context of this franchise. I can tell you that Bend Studios probably would be a good replacement in reviving or continuing this series.
Yeah,
because
I can see them working with that.
Isn't that what they did with Retribution?
Well, that's what I mean. The few bits that I played of Retribution seems to be addressing a lot of things that you guys have just said. But again, like I said, you'll be needing, once again, full context to understand the lowest point this franchise gets, and how a different studio actually technically handles that for a spin-off.
If I may, again, just going off of this game, what we know, what dealers recalled, what info I've been able to find, my take on the series so far is that it's not necessarily something Insomniac hated doing.
It was not a passion project, but something that they wanted to do for the sake of experimenting.
Well, I was also going to
mentioned that in the interviews.
I was going to say, I do get the inkling that there is the air of executive mandates in regards of like...
that we discussed that in the first part, technically.
Well, hold on. Okay, let me just explain my stance, though. I say that because while I do feel like they were putting their all into these games, I get a feeling that the heart may not have been completely in this game. At least,
I can tell you also there's okay, I don't remember I forgot if I told, but there's also an inconsistency when it comes to the free titles having writers, because I don't remember which one it is for this game. I don't know if it was Ted Price himself or someone else, because like I said also, both IMDb and Wikipedia tells different information, so I don't know who's telling the truth and who's lying, you know. But I can tell you that for the next, we were talking about Red Ratchet games, because for Resistance 2, they actually got TJ Fixman to write the story for that. So, and I can tell you that his influence is present, because the second game probably has my favorite legacy of the story of the three titles, but that's again a story for the future.
Also,
but again,
this just in, British tanks are apparently tall enough to be the equivalent of one story to a building.
And of course, that's because I have a license. Because I have a license for that. Take that.
Back to what you were saying, too.
Also, we have to remember another thing that I did mention. Even back in the day, while still relatively known thanks to the multiplayer, you have to remember, for example, this was the one franchise that was very relevant at the time, who, despite having actual stage and item representation in PlayStation's All-Star Battle Royale, did not manage to get a playable character.
That
like you said,
weird.
there were, if I remember correctly, the developer team at some point had a poll, they made some testing about wanting to potentially have a Chimera, playable Chimera, because the weapon design technically is there for something, but it says something that they probably did not even consider for a second Nathan Hale as playable.
Like,
and again, for context, Killzone got a character from it as a representation. And from what I heard, because I still have to play it, when it comes to technically weapon design, Killzone is much more by the numbers when it comes to, your standard arsenal. The strength mostly comes from what I get from the mechanic of the team. The team mechanic is in the group of people that you control over the campaign. And again, just how reprehensible the Helghast are supposed to be. But that's what I'll have to see eventually for myself.
I suppose for comparison's sake, we could bring up the fact that, well, Bioshock's representation was a Big Daddy. However, there's a difference in that. For one, the protagonist of Bioshock 1 is not the same as Bioshock 2. In fact, get this, audience who still don't know after all these years, the protagonist of Bioshock 2 actually is a Big Daddy.
In fact, well, that's the thing, Jova. If you actually don't know, the skin for Subject Alpha is actually one of the DLC costumes that the Big Daddy got.
Nice. So, at least with Bioshock, it makes sense. Hale not being the first choice for rep in, PlayStation Battle All-Star Royale, I think really speaks to just how they missed the mark with him. No pun intended.
Well, like the Stalker is doing right now.
As for Ben Studio, during this time they were relegated as the handheld studio. They made the games for the PSP and then Vita.
They made two siphon filter for the PSP, from what I checked.
I do agree with Tio, though, that I think Ben Studio could have made something spectacular out of Resistance.
Once again, from the makers of Bouncy 3D.
They really had some rehabilitation after that game.
Possibly one of the biggest glow-up in terms of gaming development companies.
I'll say.
Altering the climate itself. The power conduits, the snow, and the tower had to be related in some way. There was no time to think about it. Their armies were already guarding the tower, and more would be coming. We set the tanks up in assault formation and started across Tower Bridge. The last tanks...
And yes, Dweebs, unfortunately, in order to actually, sabotage the Chimera, we will have to destroy the Tower Bridge.
Yeah, there's plenty of other bridges.
Imagine if we had to blow up Big Ben.
I'm pretty sure someone already
Again,
did.
we've got other bells.
There aren't a lot of landmarks left in London.
As for different writers, that doesn't necessarily become a problem for each game having a different writer, because as long as it's at least one particular visionary. Because if you go back and check the original Gears of War trilogy, the first game was written by Eric Newland and Susan O'Connor. The second game was written by Joshua Ortega, who didn't come back after that, because for Gears of War 3, they got back Eric Newland as well as two new writers to handle Gears 3. So it's more so Cliff Blazinski, who was, of course, like the overseeing everything to making sure everything was consistent. Like, from what I'm seeing here, Ted Price directed this game himself.
Like I said, Wikipedia tells that, but I remember IMDb saying something else entirely, like there was someone else who did it. But the point is that Ted Price, if I remember correctly, still was a supervising figure in, regardless. So there is that. All right, tune in next time where we unfortunately have to demolish Tower Bridge for Lives's non-caring opinion, I suppose.
I mean, I'm not from London, so... Yeah.
Fuck
Libs, you're an Englishman. Have respect for your landmarks.
I'd be more impressed if one of our buildings in Staffordshire got destroyed.
See ya.
Damn.